Everybody. We're back on here to the Genesis study. Thank you, Drew, for doing last week. Now, I just want you to remind you that this next week will be, I get very confused because I tape the week before I do this sermon, but it's the 27th, I believe, of October. We're going to be worshiping at Kelowna Christian Reformed Church, just down the block, 2 houses, I guess we'd call it. And so we'll be doing that, and during that week, don't worry, small group leaders, I will have a Bible study. I'm going to do something around Reformation, because we're meeting for Reformation Sunday, and Todd's sharing, so I'll do a little study on maybe the emphasis of theology in the Reformation. All right, so today we're continuing in our Genesis sermon. We're at Genesis 2, 1-3, unlike what the cover says there. I didn't change that. Anyway, so we're at the end of the 7-day story. Now, this is a style of writing in the creation accounts. This is the genre that works. There was 7 days in almost every genre of a creation story in antiquity. It was a way of teaching. It was a way of understanding. The writer, God is accommodating to this genre around him by speaking in this way, but there's a lot of differences. So what we want to notice when we're studying this, especially as scholars do, is that they want to understand that it's important to figure out what is different by this creation narrative out of Genesis, this one we call the creation narrative, and these pagan, or what we would call false creation narratives. That's as important as anything else because they're using the same genre. So what we as students of this want to understand first is, how is it different? And boy, today we're really going to see some differences and also some similarities. And it'll also help us to understand in finding those differences, you begin to really weed out who our God is, who Yahweh is, juxtaposed to, say, Marduk or Baal or any of these other ones that are out there, because that's important. And then we get into how does this creation narrative work within our creation narratives today. And we do have them, by the way. There's lots of creation narratives out there, but we have a dominant one in the West, which evolution is, and I think it's unfortunate that evolution has made claims like they do, but it's that one that we came out of cosmic dust, where by chance. That's kind of the creation narrative that's generally accepted in our culture, which are not claims that science can ever actually make. Science doesn't have the ability to say the why. It's more the how. And so there's this assumption that because they believe that they study and they find that humanity seems to have come in a certain way, then they make the leap to, well, this means there's nothing out there. And that's a leap they just cannot make. And it's not fair. So, reminding ourselves that this text is written about the why, not the how. Let's be fair to it. We now understand that this section at the end of the first part of the creation narratives. Now, you say creation narratives. What are you saying, Emery? These are all based on the same study, inspired by the same God. But you can tell there's going to be a huge difference at the end of verse 3 in Genesis 2, where you have the 7 days end, and then what I like to call the sequel, or a different angle of the Genesis story, told in the same genre, where we're now in a garden, and then we're going to get a different explanation of what's happening on with God, humanity, the fall, all of that stuff. But these first 7 days are written in definite context of the creation narratives around them, the 7 days, which is always wrapped up in their stories. All right, so we get to this point. Humanity's been created. They've been given kingship-like status. They're made in God's image. This is very radical than created as slaves, like I said, in the other creation narratives, and being not bearing God's image, but having to take care of the images of God in the gardens, which are always stone or wood. You can see that these are incredibly different about humanity. Now we're going to find out that God is incredibly different than their gods, because it ends now with day 7. And we must understand that day 6, when humanity is made, and even though it's very good, it's not even the main purpose. Humanity is created as part of a bigger purpose, which is what day 7 represents. Day 7 is the important point because it's God's day. It's the day that emphasizes God and his purpose, which humanity and everything else is underneath. All right. Thus, the heavens and the earth were finished. I love that. Doesn't mean they were destroyed, right? So this language is were finished is they're functional. Everything's been done. It's ready to go for God to begin the process of what he wants creation to be. Remember, it's the why, it's not the how. So he has put together, and all of that language we've had in the 6 days is all language about the importance of how the creation works, why it's working, and now he has finished that action. He has got it working the way he wants. And all the host of them is, there's some debate of what that means. I tend to agree that it probably has to do with the angelic hosts or the heavenly hosts up in heaven. Everything's put in place. Oh, this darn headset, I hate it. And on the seventh day, now we're going to hear the seventh day said 3 times. Now you who've been following my teaching for a while are going to note that 3 means emphasis. The seventh day is the important thing. That's why it's said 3 times. Remember, in Jewish teaching, when you hear something twice, pay attention. When you hear something 3 times, this is the center of what it's about. So the seventh day is what the creation story is all about. It says God finished or completed, or his work is functional, that he has done, and he rested on the 7th day. Here's where we begin to have to understand the creation narratives, to understand what this means. This doesn't mean, the image of somebody putting their feet up, having a cup of tea, or going their lazy boy and cracking a beer. That's not what this resting means. Resting in antiquity is in each of the creation stories. I'm going to point that out in a minute. And in each one, the resting means that they now are able to rule. So the resting means a place to rule. So resting is not just, I'm taking a break. Resting means now he's done this, now he's ready to enact his rule in this creation. So Yahweh, of course we believe Jesus is the creator God, but at this point they wouldn't understand that, obviously. What they're saying is Yahweh is now in charge. He is in his throne room, and the resting also has to do always with the temple. So every time the pagan gods rested, they're resting in their temple after doing something in their creative work. Now, let's take those pagan narratives. In those pagan narratives, the god, like Marduk, has to fight Tiamat. So there's a big battle, and he defeats her. He comes into Babylon, and in Babylon, he has a temple made where he can rest or rule. These pagan gods are very localized gods. They're gods dedicated to a very small piece of area. The first difference we see in the creation narrative is God, his throne room, is the world. His temple is the world. That's why he creates the whole world. He's resting, but it doesn't say he goes and says, go build me a temple at this point. Later the temple will be built, and I can't teach all about that now, but he's accommodating at that time as Israel as a nation, as a light to the nation. So he has to work with the way the nations work. But in this story, there's no mention of a temple because all of the world is his temple. And what does the psalmist say? Heaven is his throne, earth is his footstool. That's all temple language. He is now in charge. He's active. And the reason I emphasize this resting as an active creator, an active king, an active ruler, is there's a bad kind of theological idea that he spun all creation into work and then he stood back and he just sat on his lazy boy and, well, whatever happens, happens. That's not what this means at all. That's called deism. It's a heresy from a Christian perspective, and it's not what this means. He is ruling actively now in his throne room. That's how they understood it. So, Emery, how do you know this? Well, let's take a look at Marduk and his battle with Tiamat, and once he's defeated that, where this language of rest comes, and you'll see that it's wrapped around a local temple. So we actually have this information from the Enuma Elish, which is their creation story. So it says, we will make a shrine, these are the Babylonians, which is to be called by name, chamber that should be our stopping place. This is the temple language. We shall find who? The gods rest therein. We shall lay out the shrine. Let us set up its encampment. So you see this rest language. This rest language is ruling. This is dominant, and it's wrapped around a temple. Their temple in this particular case, where you actually find the gardens of Babylon. You see gardens, temple, all of this stuff is wrapped up in the ancient world's mindset. When we come hither to visit you, these are the gods, we shall find rest therein. When the gods come, and in this case Marduk, we shall find rest. In other words, we will find rulership. We don't have to no longer battle. Why are they creating this in the story? Because he has just defeated the lesser god Tiamat, the god of chaos, the great god of the waters. Remember, we talked about that earlier. And how different our creation story is. The waters are just these chaotic waters that are void. They have no control. They have no evil power in and of themselves. Yahweh just says, boop, I dealt with it, used my breath, used the Spirit, taken care of, let's order things. In their world, Marduk has to have this great battle with chaos. He wins. He comes into his temple. He's going to rule there. The only reason I'm showing you this is to show this language of rest always means ruling in a temple. When Marduk heard this, his features glowed brightly like the day. Then make Babylon the task that you requested. Let its brickwork be formed, build high the shrine. So here you see, we have the creation story out of the pagan world. Marduk comes in, and it's all about rest, which means his rulership after his creation story, which is always conflict with evil. Evil and good in paganism is constantly in conflict. That's not the case in the creation story. So when they hear the word rest, what I'm trying to say is that has meaning to them that it doesn't have to us. They all understood, because of these creation stories, that it was always wrapped up with temple and ruling. That's how they heard it. I guess it's like a word that culturally had meaning that perhaps if you didn't live in that culture. So he didn't have to explain that Yahweh's coming in and creating the temple, the earth as his temple, and that he's going to rule. He just has to use rest because that's what it means. Think of the word, let's look at a term like 9/11. That has very strong cultural meaning to us. But if you weren't from our culture and somebody said, 9/11, it wouldn't mean anything to you. Of course it means something to us. Just like that, rest meant something to the ancient mind. So let's going back to the text. We have the work that, thus the heavens and the earth were finished, all of the host of them, and the seventh day God finished his work, all he had done, and he rested. Now you see that in light of that. The temple is now set up, and earth is his temple, and he is ruling on the seventh day. The seventh day, this is the important point. This is the high point, because this is all about him taking his throne. This is a God who created creation for himself, and by his graciousness and generosity created us in his image. But this is all about his. From all his work he has done, this is all of the formation, the functioning of coming together. That's what this seventh day is about. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy. So now, not only that, he's now created and began this, and this is worship language, temple, worship, right? And now we have the God of the temple creating the seventh day and making it holy. You can see why Sabbath becomes so important, because it's his day. And there's a third time, the seventh day, important. Holy means separate from the others, because it's dedicated to him now ruling and reigning. It wasn't just him putting things together. This is its purpose. That makes it separate. That makes it sanctified. Because on it, God ruled or rested. There's that language, rested again. Ruled. He's in charge. He's active from all of his functioning that he had done in creation. Now it's been done. He has made it sanctified. He is now made this world exactly as it is, and the seventh day is its purpose. He's in his throne room. He's in charge. He's sovereign. That's the peace. And he didn't have to battle the false gods. He didn't have to battle evil. He just did these things for his work, and he has made it good. And this is what creation narrative is about. Our Lord and Savior. He is the one that makes it about himself. All right? So I hope that helps. It's probably new for some of you, but it certainly wasn't new for them. So, okay, now you might want to ask yourselves, what about Sabbath? Because we know the Sabbath becomes a big thing. Whatever else you do with the Sabbath, it has to do with this story. And it has to do with the people celebrating this God in his place, in his triumph, in his throne room. That's why it was so important to the ancient mind that they practiced Sabbath. It also showed who humanity wasn't. They are done from day 6. They're serving this God who is the God that is in charge of everything. So whatever else Sabbath was for the Jewish mind, it was pointing to who God is and who we're not. That's why it was so important to them to understand why Sabbath keeping was so important. It was a declaration of who our God is, juxtaposed to the gods around them, which did not have a Sabbath, a rest time, because the people were not invited in on this because they were just slaves in the garden. All right, so let's get into some questions. There's a lot to go on here. And let me tell you first that Sabbath is a tough question for me. Clearly, it is declared to keep the Sabbath. What that means, I think we get caught up. The Pharisees got into these rules about Sabbath keeping. I think it misses the point. I think whatever Sabbath is for us, it has to emphasize the worship component, the liturgy of worship that points to who he is and who we're not. Number two, he says Sabbath was created for man, not man for Sabbath. Sabbath is created for us to know who we are in God's kingdom and who God is. And it is not created to oppress us, because this God's not an oppressive God. So whatever Sabbath keeping means, it has to do with that. Now, I will say that there is some tension, and theologians have been debating this for a long time, and I unfortunately cannot give you the right answer because I'm not sure I know it. The question is, should we still be keeping Sabbath, at least as the Jews understand it? Well, first of all, we don't. Saturday is the Sabbath according to the Jewish calendar. We meet on the Sunday. And here's where the theological question comes. Why do we meet on a Sunday? Because of Jesus' resurrection. Where Jesus' resurrection is done on the first day of the new creation. The 7 days are done. He's raised on the third day, the seventh day, the eighth day, I guess, in light of that. He is the first day of new creation. So the theological question is, does the Sabbath continue for us? Does it move to the resurrection? Or is Jesus really saying that that's our job? Has he already finished the work? Are we supposed to continue in the same Sabbath keeping as the Old Testament, or the first covenant emphasizes? Or are we under the new covenant, and is that different? These are questions. You'll notice I'm not answering them for you because these are good questions. The resurrection has happened. There is new creation. So how does that work with the first creation, amongst the new creation, and what does Sabbath keeping mean? Are we, as Paul says, is every day the same? In other words, every day is holy because God has won through the resurrection. It's his throne room again. He's sitting at the right hand of God. That's all throne room language. Or are we still maintain this emphasis on the God of this creation? I'm not going to answer for you because I don't know. Sorry. And trust me, I've read. I think that Eugene Peterson is the best I've read on this, if you're interested. And his emphasis on Sabbath keeping is whatever it is, it's to bring honor to this God. And whatever that means, we're not going to be able to find rules that'll make it work. So, questions. The Lord resting clearly meant he had developed creation as functional for his purposes and now reigns as sovereign. What does this sovereignty tell the ancients about where to put their trust, and what does it speak to us today? So, what is this telling us about God, and what does it mean to us practically about our trust? Number two, the seventh day is mentioned 3 times and is called holy and sacred. Why such emphasis on this particular day? How might this influence the idea of a Sabbath observance? Do you practice the Sabbath? If so, how? There's a conversation you guys can have of your opinions on this. I told you some of the theological reasons. Let me know. I'd love to hear if you guys want to share that with me. All right. And number 3, compared to the contemporary creation narratives, we become living beings by chance and are part of a cosmic chance. What does this creation narrative tell us about the creation around us? How might this creation narrative be held up against the current cultural narrative, and how might we share with seekers this good news? All right, good luck. This is a heavy topic for 3 verses, right? That's a lot. But it really is the capstone of this first part 1